It's a tough one to moderate because really what we have is two programs tonight. We could do this entire evening on reporting from Asia. Bob began his journalism career in China. After the September 11th attacks, he made a beeline for Afghanistan. Later on, made many reporting tours to Iraq. And more recently, and this is increasingly rare in network news these days, has reported extensively from China. He has been to both Myanmar and Bangladesh, also on more than one occasion to report on the Rohingya crisis. And he has been, and this is almost absurd to say, but he's been not once, not twice, but 8 times to North Korea. But the other story, and we could do a whole evening on this, is a profoundly personal one. For those who know Bob, the other day, the 29th of January, is known as Alive Day. That was the day a roadside bomb in Iraq nearly took Bob's life, and the day that a whole other journey began for Bob Woodruff and for his family. And ultimately, it's why Bob is not just known as a terrific reporter, he's also known as a champion for the veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan and other conflicts who've come home with traumatic brain injury, as Bob did. So, 2 stories tonight, 2 great guests. To get us started, warm welcome, please, for Bob Woodruff.
You're too nice to me. I guess you were all those years ago.
Yeah, I was nice to you even before. I should say it's actually a tough one to moderate also because we've known each other a long time.
It's like a slight reunion here with all the old World News Tonight, ABC people from
Yes, actually I was going to say that later, but but that's okay. Bob's producer Christine Romo is here, who travels the globe with him. It's a bit difficult. I have to do this off the cuff. Where's Kate Felsen? Kate Felsen in the back, who was with Bob in Baghdad on that fateful day, and Chuck Lustig, who was running the foreign desk. It was a Sunday, and well, you'll see in a few moments what they all had to deal with on their end of helping Bob and his family. You're also a tough person to book, by the way. I may have known you a long time, but I guess when you travel
in Asia, move it here.
Right, right. So listen, I thought perhaps the best way to deal with my little concern and issue is to be somewhat chronological here. And I must say, for all the time I'd known you, I hadn't really known too much about your Asia experience at the beginning. So why don't you, if you can just say a couple of words about, because you certainly didn't go to China with the idea of being a journalist.
No.
What were you doing and why did you go?
So at that time, I was, actually when I was in law school at Michigan, back in the 1980s, I remember the front of the magazines and Newsweek had Deng Xiaoping on the front and how the country was changing and economically it's taking a huge shift, and I was just infatuated with it. So I started studying Chinese when I was in law school. And then when I came out of law school, it was in 1987, I went to a large firm here in New York, Sherman & Sterling, and I was doing all, corporate law. I was doing M&A, and the market had just tanked in that fall of 1987. So what's there to do when you're doing M&A in New York? So anyway, so the thing's really slowing down. It was getting pretty dull. So I decided after my 1 year practicing that year to take 1 year off, to step away from the firm and go teach for 1 year.
And you hadn't just studied Chinese. I mean, were you fluent or?
No, not even close.
Okay.
It was just unbelievable. That was all learned in class. And then when we lived in New York, in Beijing, for the next year, it got fairly decent.
Right.
And so anyway, went to teach law to young Chinese students at the largest law universities there in Beijing. Mm-hmm. And it was so literally I proposed to my wife Lee. And 2 days later, after our wedding, we moved to Beijing for a year. And that was as a lawyer, so I practiced teaching young Chinese students.
That is a big gamble. I probably should have had you up here from the beginning.
If you want humor, put her up here.
So you go there, and of course, there are probably not that many lawyers from this country, and certainly not that many who speak Chinese, speak Mandarin. But then the timing is such that you're there, you go in late 88, and you're there in early 89. And of course, I think this audience knows full well what started to happen in early 89, and we have protests in Tiananmen. And we'll do a lot of fast forwarding here, but all of a sudden you're translating for the great CBS correspondent Bob Simon in Tiananmen Square.
Yeah, we were completely in the China world at the university where we were. So I didn't really know many Westerners in Beijing at the time, but we knew one sound man from CBS that we had met. And so when it happened, when a lot of my students during the Tiananmen Square attacks, they stopped coming to class. Mm-hmm. So I had something else to do. So I wanted John Liu, who's my friend at the time, and I said, well, maybe I could go work with you guys and just be a fixer and get you around town, and not to do the interviews, but I know you had a lot of these American reporters coming in and producers. Mm-hmm. And I know Beijing a little bit, so maybe I can just help you guys get around town. They said, okay. So they hired me in to do that. And largely I was out with a lot of Bob Simon, getting around the city when the Tiananmen Square, when the uprisings began, and then, of course, up to the moment where there was the massacre.
Right.
So that was the beginning of it. I had no real intentions to become a journalist at the time, but I became pretty addicted in some ways to do this kind of work. I was thinking this is what you typically do in journalism, is to do cover stories like this. I mean, I want to do that. So when I eventually changed it over to journalism and go give my shot at it, it took some time to get a story quite as enticing as that one.
Right, right. So we're going to indulge in some massive fast forwarding here now. But Bob, then you got the bug, and then quite successful in pretty short order with CBS and then with ABC, and jumping ahead about a decade. So the September 11th attacks happened, as I just mentioned. And so I will say I was always struck, we were just talking about this a minute ago, that there's not a lot of people, I mean, you could count on at all the networks on probably 10 fingers who had extensive or really any experience in Afghanistan, for example, much less Iraq, and you hadn't. But you went in there, almost immediately, right? After September 11th to Afghanistan?
Yeah, I was in the London bureau at the time. Lee and I were living in London and covered a lot of Milosevic, things happening in Yugoslavia. That was most of what's happened at the end of the 1990s. And then suddenly there was this moment on 9/11. I was in the office in London, and one of our producers called me up in my office. Did you see this Cessna hitting the building here in New York?
Cessna.
Yeah. And I said, no, I didn't see it. It's so bizarre. And I walked out to the main rim out there in the office, and then the other one hit, and we all turned to each other and we said, Osama bin Laden. We've been looking at him for years. And so within the next 5 hours, I went back and hugged my 4 kids and my wife Lee at our place in London, and left to Islamabad, where we lived all the way through from 9/12 through October 7th, when finally the war really began and our access into Afghanistan began. So that opened up, and then really, I think I was there straight for the next 3 months or so, having a chance to get back.
And I really don't mean to, you said I was being nice, and I'm not trying to butter you up even more, but I always thought at the time, and if you go back and look at the reporting you did, and others, I was struck by the fact that, television news people are constantly, and sometimes for good reason, criticized for just a sort of parachuting in style. I always thought parachuted in and seemed like a veteran pretty soon after your arrival. Were you comfortable? I mean, had you done any kind of conflict reporting until then?
There was Kosovo, and those I think were the ones with ABC that had done some conflict. But there wasn't nothing. I had never really covered a true war before that one. So it took some time. I knew the countryside, and I knew, I think, the mentality of it. But no, I had not covered where there was this kind of intense war going on.
But do you remember feeling particularly comfortable or not? Or
I felt completely comfortable. I did. Some people, and I've talked about war coverage before with a lot of people, with journalists, and certainly with friends. I've got so many friends in the military. Is that there's kind of a addiction or desire to have something that is, I guess, in some ways simple. Is the day starts this way and the day ends that way. And in between, you're working with a very small number of people, with a small team, who you get to know extremely well in a short period of time. And so that gives you kind of comfort as long as everybody on that team has got some experience and has a good amount of knowledge about the place you are. So I don't think I ever felt in danger. I mean, we were at moments for sure, but I think generally, I think people that do these kind of discoveries, they think maybe they'll get their hand shot or something, or maybe they'll have a bomb in the distance, but I don't think any of us really thought too much all the times. I can't concentrate because all I want to think about is the danger. I'm freaking out, I'm shaking. I don't think that it really goes through those that cover war. And I don't think that, I did not have that discomfort from the very beginning.
And I should say that, speaking of Kate and Chuck and the others who are here, we all who went to those places had the benefit of very, very strong, capable, experienced people. Doesn't inoculate you, obviously, against anything, but people who ABC News and the other outfits had hired locally who helped in many ways. So jumping now just a little bit ahead. In 2005, we had a different kind of trauma at ABC News when we lost the great anchor Peter Jennings. And he passed very quickly after his diagnosis with lung cancer. And I think it's in late 2005, Bob Woodruff and Elizabeth Vargas are named the successors and the anchors of ABC. It's a long time ago now, but the idea was to have two people there, not to have that sort of folksy morning television kind of thing, but to have one person in the chair quite often, and then another person who would go on the road to report. And just prior to the State of the Union, to bring it back to this week.
When that was set up, I mean, I think, I already told you what my addiction has always been. I was not going to be the one that wanted to be
sitting in the chair.
Sitting behind the chair. I mean, I know that Peter Jennings, for example, his frustration was immense when he was feeling trapped there in Detroit. Yeah. I mean, in New York. So if you're the anchor of the show, they don't ever take the risk to send you off someplace for a story, thinking the gigantic story is going to break out, and you're now far away from the desk. So this was going to get a chance to have this.
Because there would be two of you. Yeah.
Unprecedented amount of freedom to do something like that.
So it's State of the Union week in 2006, 12 years ago this week. And the idea was, because it was there was no other bigger overseas story, right? That the United States is assisting and training the troops in Iraq. And I think the phrase was to help them stand up so the United States forces could stand down. And they send Bob and I think you went to Israel and the Palestinian territories just
Gaza.
prior, right? And Gaza, okay.
Right. Hamas was taken.
So that was the idea behind the trip. And here we have, and I have to say, I know some of you are maybe profoundly familiar with this. I know my ex-ABC colleagues are, but some of you may not know at all what the circumstances were like. So we do have a video clip, actually a couple of them, but if we can play the first one. So this was, this is about what happened on January the 29th, 2006.
In 2006 was supposed to be the year that the Iraqi troops and police stood up and the U.S. stood down. And Bob really wanted to go in there and find out how difficult that challenge was.
This was the biggest story in the world, frankly. So we wanted Bob to be there. At the same time, we recognized there were risks, as there are for all of our people, as they go to Iraq to cover this war.
Bob and I had been to Iraq many times before that. There's a sense of danger to it, but there's a sense of excitement to it. And there's a sense of great responsibility that comes with being there, with covering this war.
We all knew each other very well. Magus I've known for 15 years. Vinny I've known for a number of years working with Peter Jennings. I worked with Bob in Iraq on numerous occasions. And we had the right team for this. We had the best people.
We were doing the job we loved, but at the same time, we just want to do our job and get out of there because we knew that things were really bad and getting worse by the day.
Today's mission, we're going to be doing a sector battlefield circulation, getting out to see the AO.
The plan was we were going to take him to 3 sites and then the final stop was supposed to be at the actual water treatment plant.
Don't get complacent. All right, let's get mounted up and get ready to roll, guys. This is the main artery going through Baghdad. It's known for IDs.
Taji is about 25 kilometers north of Baghdad, and it was a very dangerous town, known for a lot of insurgency activity.
You can come out of the gate and get hit. You can go 100 meters and get hit.
Hey, watch the car on the right. Watch this car. Go left.
This is one of the fixed base areas that the Iraqi military is protecting.
While we were at access point 2, an Iraqi patrol rolled by, and Bob wanted to know if he could ride along with them to experience an Iraqi patrol firsthand. And so I put them into the back of the vehicle, but I closed the doors behind them, and I felt pretty comfortable that everything was going to be okay.
I was filming Coconut Grove, and then the Iraqi gunner said to me that this is a very bad area because there's lots of insurgents there. And I thought this is probably a place for us to get down. And shortly after he said that,
It's like bang.
It shakes everything, and everything comes to a standstill.
I immediately hopped out of my vehicle.
We were taking fire.
And ran about 250 meters up from my vehicle, hoping that nobody was hurt, hoping that everything was okay.
And then you saw the camera falling inside, covered in blood.
Blood is just
and
flying
you saw
through, you don't know
the
who's
Doug's
hitting.
legs hanging in the air.
And I remember looking to the right and seeing Bob's body lean
And just
over, crumbled into the tank.
and I was lying on my back on top of the tank. I could hear
You
gunfire,
see dirt, smoke, you see
explosions, and soldiers or people screaming.
And I remember noticing a hole in the side of his neck.
I couldn't move.
Bob was having some sort of convulsions.
I
He
remember
was
thinking the only thing that I knew how to
vomiting.
do at that moment was to just put my hand over his neck.
Turn his eyes.
I remember thinking to myself,
He'll pass
"Just don't
out
die.
again."
Just don't die. You can't be dead. You cannot be dead. This can't be happening.
Screaming, come back. You're all right.
Bob turned
Come
around
back."
and he looked right at me. He said to me, "Am I alive?" And I said, "You're alive." I said, "You're
Just get
alive.
back
You're
to
going to
me.
be
Am I
okay.
alive?"
Am I alive?" And I just kept telling him to hang in there. It's going to be fine. We're going to get out of here. We're going to get out of here.
It's been a long time since I saw that, Tom.
Yeah. I asked Bob in the middle of it, by the way, if he's still in touch with any of those guys in the military. He said you had lunch with one of them a couple of days ago.
No. John McFarland, who was the guy, the one who doesn't have a lot of hair. He's an old friend. He said he's doing great. He sent me an email on my live day a couple days ago. So I had contact with him.
Yeah. I should say, by the way, so Bob suffered extensive shrapnel wounds to the brain and other parts of the body. Doug Vogt, who you see there, so you know he's okay, the cameraman, but he had serious wounds as well. And an Iraqi soldier was wounded, but he survived as well. Now, obviously, it goes without saying anyway, but then looking at this, that those of us, including those I've introduced already, we'll never forget it. But and equally obvious, you don't remember anything about that day. Where does your memory? I mean, how far up do you remember before that happened?
On that trip, little things are still there in my brain. I think before we got to Iraq, we went to Gaza. I remember interviewing President Carter, who was there. We were supposed to go then into Jordan and do a story there. We were diverted fairly quickly and going back up to Iraq. We did one little story in Baghdad about the big successful ice cream store there and what it's like to live and have a business in the middle of Baghdad.
Actually. Yep.
Yeah. So that was a great one. And people ask me all the time if that's still there, and I have no idea. I made a promise to my wife all those years, after all this happened, I'm not going to go back to these places until there's peace there.
A good promise, by the way.
Yeah, I know, but I kind of want to. But I said no more war covers, but I will cover conflict. So that's why I'm in Asia. That's sometime later. But so I remember that, and then I remember when we were getting into that tank. And then I remember we're driving down that road, and then
so you do
Doug
remember
Vogt
that,
and I
yeah.
we got up. Yeah, I remember that. And we got up and doing a stand up, and I could see the palm trees on the side of the road. Yeah. And the one I don't remember, but Doug told me this. The cameraman was with me, that the driver, who's Iraqi, they told us to get down because he thinks that this road is getting too tight and there might be some kind of IED. But that was 3 seconds later when that thing blasted. And I remember when this happened, I kind of just suddenly, I'm looking at the trees, and then suddenly, boom, my body's just kind of floating around somewhere. And then I remember a little bit when I woke up, and I just remember I just had no idea what had happened to me. I didn't have an idea where I am, or where I was, and I just remember exactly what Vinny said, that I asked him if we're alive. And that's the last thing I remember until I woke up in Bethesda Naval 36 days later.
We're going to get to that in a second.
You do want me to reveal that I woke up?
Yeah, good one, Bob.
Ruin your show.
I don't have a show.
Asia Society show.
Okay, all right. So Bob goes and, by the way, just one other thing which has always struck me, and tell me if this is an exaggeration, and Lee may know this, it may have been in your book, but I'm always, much was made in your story and others who suffered injuries, particularly soldiers in Iraq, of the incredible quality and speed of battlefield medicine. And somebody said at some point, and I don't know if this is hyperbole, that if you were to suffer an incident or an accident, God forbid, like that, here on 70th Street and Park Avenue, your odds of being okay way lower than the odds of somebody suffering that where there's going to be, number one, a helicopter in 2 seconds, unbelievably qualified, right?
Yeah, the strange and sad irony of that, Tom, is that I say this sometimes, that where did Bob Simon die?
Yeah.
He died impacted New York City after doing all of this all these years.
Yeah.
And I say about the military, they got us out of there with these helicopters, these amazing pilots.
In like 20 minutes,
37 minutes from the time of the impact. We had to go a mile down the road after this happened. Everybody got out of the vehicles, both the Iraqis and the American guys, got out, opened fire, stopped this attack, got us out of the tank, put us into another vehicle, and got us a mile down the road where the helicopter came in, took us out to Baghdad. They brought us in, stopped us from dying, realized we had neural problems. This was a brain injury, where the specialty was up in Balad. So they got us into another helicopter, got us up to Balad. By the time we were on the table there, it was 37 minutes after this hit.
It's unbelievable.
And then on top of all of that, these were the doctors, I think, that had done 4 or 5 of those surgeries that day alone by the time they got to mine. They knew what did it, they knew how to fix it, and they had more experience than anybody doctors in the world.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, so if this had happened in New York City, I don't think I'd be alive. So yeah, they're incredible military. It's just the biggest one is the recovery with so many with IED wounds in this war.
So Bob then, Baghdad, Balad, Germany, which has been a typical, that's military facility there. And each time when it seems safe for you and Doug to be moved, then you come to Bethesda Naval Hospital. And as you've said, 36 days.
I missed all of the Winter Olympics.
Yeah, you slept through February, right?
All of February. Yeah.
Okay. So can we show the next clip then, which Bob has already given away?
So I walked in the room, and I parted the curtain, and Bob was sitting up in bed. And he turned to me and he said, "Sweetie, where have you been?" Just like that. Where'd I get you? And I think I rushed over to him and, gave him a big kiss, and then I thought, okay, where do I begin?
That's nice. Do you want to see if there's a knife right here? There's like a lot of knives and stuff.
I picked up the phone, and it was Lee. And she said, "Dave, I'm here with your brother in the hospital, and we've had a little bit of a miracle. He's awake, he's talking, he's asking what happened to him."
What do you think, Big Dave?
And I couldn't believe it.
Did we ever get any pictures? Did we take pictures of our stuff there? When we finally got into Iraq?
Iraq.
In Iraq?
Yeah. I just sat next to his bed, and Started talking to him.
You had a car, right?
Yeah, camera. I could just see it in his eyes that he had all these questions. And he was trying to get a few of them out, and he wanted to know more, and he wasn't sure. And I remember walking out of there feeling really good, feeling like, Bob's back.
I'm gonna have to go away from the double background. I'm just gonna have to go one thing.
So Bob wakes up, starts talking, and for us it was a huge relief. We all just couldn't believe it. But I think for him it was like the beginning.
God, those little girls are going to college this year. It's so weird.
It is weird. I assume they've seen this a few times.
What do I call the country of Iraq? Iraqi?
I think you said Iraqi.
Iraqi.
Yeah. So actually, let's talk about that for a second. Is it aphasia, expressive aphasia? Is that when you are looking for a word because,
yeah.
I mean, just again, by way of some background, I remember when some of us were permitted to come see you when you came up to the hospital here in New York, and by then we couldn't believe how far you've progressed in such a short time. But you still occasionally were sort of looking for a word so how did that? And you were pretty impatient, weren't you, with your, as I remember?
Yeah, I think that is absolutely true. Because in Taji, where I said 37 minutes, they removed 16 centimeters of the skull off there because the brain was expanding when you get an impact like that. And I was hit on the left side. There was some shattering of the bones. There was rocks and metal that was implanted in this side. This completely got shattered on this side. One of the two rocks in there, one's still in there. One went all the way through past the trachea and the esophagus and stopped right on the artery on the other side. So I should not be alive, and all the blood was pouring out of this side.
Okay.
A couple of the people, you already showed the video, what do you want me to do? So they stopped all that and saved their lives, but basically what happened was because of that damage to the brain on the left side, it's aphasia, and so you lose your language. I couldn't remember really the names of even my own children. I couldn't remember the names of a single state in America or really any country in the world. So the way I explain it now is that it's almost as if the words are there, the letters are there, but the words are not there because sometimes the letters get all out of order.
Mm-hmm.
So I know what I want to say, and I can come up with some other synonym now to make the point that I want to make. But back then I had 0 synonyms.
Right.
I could literally not explain what I wanted to say.
I remember they were showing you cards, right, and things to get your sort of relearn. Yeah.
Like a paper clip or something. Like, show this to me. I could not remember what it is.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember to say banana. And I think my wife was absolutely convinced that I was not going to do anything I'm doing now ever again. And I think sometimes too is that it's almost like the window of your office gets hit by a bomb and shattered, and all of the folders, all the papers out of the folders, out of the files just fly out into the street.
Huh.
And some of those, just because of time and the natural way of the brain, is that some of those papers I have to go get out of the street, and bring them, put them back in, study it, learn it, memorize it. And other ones just naturally just blow back and go right where they came from.
Wow.
So, the brain starts to recover that way. And I think there's about 150 brain injury cases a year in the United States alone.
Mm-hmm.
So many families have gone through it. And, some things you'll never get back, but I think a lot of it you'll get back just naturally, but also just by work. I mean, you have to do everything you can do to read, exercise. There's a way to do it, but it's I can never say to anybody who's got the same thing how much they'll get back.
So, but you just raised an interesting point about how you never would think you'd come back to doing what you're doing now. Were you just laser focused? Well, you definitely were laser focused on getting the language back and getting those skills back, but did you, you're a very determined person. Did you doubt at any point that you were going to at least try, or were you just focused on getting better? I mean, at what point did you think, we could be sitting here a decade later talking about North Korea and the Rohingya and whatever else.
Yeah, I can't really remember exactly my thoughts at that time, to tell you the truth. I can't remember a lot what I was thinking back then, but I knew I wanted to get back. If you get an injury like this, you wake up. I remember this with myself. I woke up, I was ecstatic. I was so happy to be alive. And then, of course, I had my friends were pouring in, my friends from when I grew up with later at ABC. I was so happy, and my assumption at that time was like, okay, that was kind of interesting. Now I got my tooth removed. Now I can go and I'll recover and go home the same way I was before. But then over time you start to launch into some depression because you realize this is not moving the speed that you wanted it. And that starts to change everything. So then you have to have a real dedication to have to do it and want to do it, and have somebody to tell you there's hope that something will be accomplished.
Right.
And so I saw a lot of that, and I had an amazing family around me. And ABC was very good. That gave me some hope that I would someday get back to some normality.
So indulge us in one more fast forward here. It's not even that far forward. To your great credit and your determination, is that really you've in two very different ways. Your brother said it's a beginning, and so you've had a beginning to a whole new or renewed career as a globetrotting reporter, and an incredible career is not the word, but just the effort you and Lee, which we'll get to in a moment, have made on behalf of people who've come home with the injury you have. If we could just spend a couple of moments on the first part of that. So, North Korea. And I'm picking here because you've been all over the world, really, in the last decade or so. There you are. So shifting gears profoundly here for a moment. I think I mentioned to you that I happened to get a call from an AP writer a week ago because Lester Holt from NBC had been, and I guess he took some criticism. I had not seen what he did in his reporting in the run-up to the Olympics from North Korea about going there when things are so stage managed. And to me, it's important to go, but it's a legitimate question. And you've now, as I said up there, you've been 8 times. What's your answer to that question about whether it's worthwhile? And have there been times when you've gone and spent the time and the effort and the energy and all that and found it's been a complete waste of your time?
Certainly not the last point. I think it's a challenge every time you go there. I think all these countries that nobody knows anything about, there's nothing better than get somebody who thinks the way you do and grew up in the place that you grew up, can go to a place and give your perspective on this place that you know will change their thoughts about that country. I mean, you don't want to have just speculation and people making up stories about another country without ever going there. It is true, when you go to North Korea, we are largely limited into Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea. A few times we're able to go outside, a couple times to the DMZ from the north side. We were able to go to one time to the nuclear location. But that was when they're trying to end their nuclear systems. We were never able to go to any of the, whatever you want to call them, the labor camps. So we're never able to see those. But I know when we go there, we can tell the story, and they're okay to some degree that we do mention in North Korea that there are issues with the people there in terms of freedom, the way they're treated, the oddities of the government. But mostly we just go there and we see something new that we hadn't seen before. Any changes in the people? What are their lives different? They have cell phones now. They wear high heels now. They seem to be more free. The ones who are minders.
Are those the main things you've seen lately that have been different?
No, I've seen. I mean, the wealth within Pyongyang is now skyrocketing. I think it seems to be. The problem is when I say something like wealth, we don't know. It could be just financial shifts, from somewhere else outside other parts of the country. They go in there. The food is better. The buildings are bigger. There's more electricity. The people are more talkative. They're much more comfortable with Americans coming there. There's certainly within that part, which is a very elite. It is the elite part of North Korea. Is that people much more proud of their country than they were before. So you can report all this. You'll never know exactly what's going on inside their minds. And we're not going to get many true. Every time we interview somebody, remember we have a minder next to us at all time. 2 of them, actually. Everybody with us has to be together with someone else so that we can't have private conversations. So that's protected by the government. So every time we speak, interview somebody, the minder will be taking notes of everything that interviewee is saying to us, and they write down everything we ask. So nothing is private, nothing is. Nevertheless, I think we can get a different perspective on what's happening there.
What about these parades, by the way? I don't know. I've never been. I actually would love to go.
It was interesting, you know. I mean, Chuck Lustig is here, by the way. He's the first guy I went with. He was running the foreign reporting back then. And we were there. We're the only ones. We went in all by ourselves, and we were one of the first to get in there. And then what developed is that they would decide that a lot of the, to have reporters allowed in North Korea, a lot of it was to glorify the history. And so inviting hundreds, or dozens at least, of foreign reporters to come in to watch the parades. So we'd sit in the side of it, and we could not move, we could not leave. We had to stay in there for about 3 hours as all of it's being done. There was really nowhere to go to the bathroom even. So we had to be careful about coffee and
perils
beer.
of reporting in North Korea.
Yeah, it's very difficult. And then that's what we witnessed. I mean, they know that's pretty impressive, the way that they do this. They're extremely well educated in how to march. And they wanted to show us the weapons. They wanted us to show us their power. So there's a lot of that.
I want to come around again, weird segue, but to another part of the region, and just related in terms of the breadth of your reporting recently. And here's a place, I'm now going to the Rohingya crisis. I call it a crisis, but the whatever you want to call it, the mass exodus of these people from the Rakhine State in Myanmar. And I'm impressed, actually, maybe we'll get to this in a minute, but how much time the network has devoted to this and that they've sent you there. But also, we were actually going to play a clip of Bob has seen at various instances and iterations of this on the Bangladeshi side, which is where they go, these people, and been with these huge migrations of people and heard, I mean, really, the same disturbing accounts, if you read the papers about this, that you will hear. It's not often seen on television. We were going to play one of those, and my colleague John Wong, who's working on this program tonight, said, you know, that's the kind of thing we've heard a lot about, what you don't see very often. And he thought, and I think he's right, was really impressive is you collected all this evidence, and it's a really, it's almost has a documentary feel, all the interviews you did, and in some cases with children, and they all identify that Burmese soldiers from Myanmar. And then you go across the border and take that to officials in Myanmar and also to a leading Buddhist monk. Maybe before we play the clip, can you just, who is this? Because I don't...
So, you know, there's actually somewhat of a, I would say, very much a majority in most of the Buddhist part of Myanmar. Absolutely don't believe the story about the Rohingya people. Whether they're fed it, and we've seen this through Facebook is the large... gets a lot of the information.
They've actually used the term fake news, which...
Fake news? Yeah. So they have this perspective on what's happening in Rakhine and what's happening to the Rohingya people. And so we do interviews around the cities, as they would absolutely say that they don't like these people and they don't believe what they're talking about. They don't believe in the allegations of killing, burning down their villages. I would say almost nobody we met believed that, just on the streets. And then so the monks is also, there's several of them that have also been very strong advocates supporting the Buddhist perspective on this and accusing the Rohingyas of lying about it.
Right.
So I don't know if you got this.
Well, there's one clip where Bob goes to see a government official who, after a while, throws you out of his office. And then you go to see this monk. If we can play that one, if we have it from Myanmar.
hate can be found where you least expect it. Hello. Nice to meet you. There are about 1 million Rohingyas who have fled out of this country into Bangladesh. 600,000 of them just since August 25th. Why are so many people running if there's not a threat of death to them?
The media from the West created the story that these people were killed by the Myanmar army because these Muslim people, these Rohingya people, they have planned to occupy the Rakhine State as their Islamic state.
Are you saying that the Rohingya people are making this up? That the media is making this up?
I will say that the news produced by the Western media is completely wrong.
Many of the children that we spoke to said they witnessed the killing and that was done by those in military uniforms.
I think that those kids are ordered to lie.
Even their own parents have been killed. Do you think they're lying about that?
They are lying. I do not believe that the military killed their parents.
I got to thank Christine Romo, by the way, back there, who's been committed to this, for covering this for so many years with me, and she's the master of it. Anyway, I just want to say that.
And is it, as I said, I'm struck by the fact that you have the platform. This is not a story that we at the Asia Society are super interested in it, obviously, but it's not something you see that often on network news. Do you have a lot of pushback? Is it hard? Do you...
pushback about...
Well, I mean, do you have the leeway to say, hey, this is something that we really think is important and we're going to go there and it should... I mean, how hard is it?
From within ABC?
Yeah.
No, I think once you show that a story is extremely important and the story is well told and you seem to have an impact on it, I think it's much more easy to get approval to go to a place like this. And I also think that we've been going there for a long time, and so we're in there early on the story. So I think ABC has a pretty good feeling that we've been there since the beginning. I'm not saying own the story, but we've been there for a significant amount of time, and updates on it. In terms of something like the monk, obviously when he claims this is all made up, even the children lie about it, our number one priority was to try to get to one of these villages within Myanmar where this happened. All we've been able to see is those that have fled into Bangladesh.
And talk about it.
So they can tell the stories.
Right,
Can we just go and see, if you're saying this never happened, and the government is saying it never happened, why don't we just go ahead and go there and see? And they would basically all say, no, we've been there, it's not true. And we said, well, then we can go. It's an easy story. And we've never been able to go any of these places to do it. So I think you just look at that and you pretty much know the truth of it. So that's been frustrating. ABC, Nightline has been remarkably good about it. This is one of those international stories I think they really are very, very interested in. So now we'd like to go back into Myanmar and try to talk to some of the ethnic groups have also been struggling as well in Myanmar for many years, the Kachin people, for example. So I think there's so many stories to tell in that whole region. I think we have a lot more to do.
So come back here when you've been and we'll do another thing just about that. Lee Woodruff, will you join us? How about a hand for Lee Woodruff? You're supposed to stand for your wife, Bob.
Oh, thank you.
Lee, by the way, is I'm not going to do the whole 9 yards, but a pretty accomplished media professional in her own right. And what were you? You were in PR when you went to China all those years ago? We're not going to do your whole life story, but is that right?
I mean, I don't get equal time. Yes, I was in PR, working for Hill & Knowlton, which you were saying we didn't know that many Americans there, but that was at the time, the only public relations firm in the PRC. So I was the only Caucasian person in the office. So I was trotted out when Lee Iacocca would come in for the Beijing Jeep merger and all that stuff. Look, we have a white person here. She can pour the coffee. But because of that, I knew all of the foreign journalists. So we knew all of the, Agency France Presse and all the Americans and the Brits. And that was where we would go to their apartment to take a shower because there was no hot running water at the school.
You're just reminding me. I've completely forgotten. Do we still have the photos of Lee and Bob in China, or have we just skipped right through those? If you have them, pop them up.
We got married 2 days before we moved there. I don't think she loved it.
I cried for 2 days when I got there.
She didn't realize we were living.
Yeah, It was really Peace Corps conditions. It was serious. It was the
China's
law.
a different place now,
Yeah,
let's put it that way.
very, very different place.
She would
Thank
bike
you.
to work. There were no cars.
Yeah. Now there are bikes and cars. But anyway, I mentioned that since the accident or the attack, Bob's life and your lives have just sort of taken these, they're concentric but parallel amazing routes. One is all this work that Bob does around the world, but the other is, I was going to say equally, but there's no ranking the two, just extraordinary work you guys have done with the foundation. It's the Bob Woodruff Foundation. Okay, well, yeah, there we are. How about that?
Yeah, look at those cheeks. That was back when I had collagen.
Looks like I'm a member of the party.
And Bob actually wore that Mao jacket to teach.
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
Wow.
And that was really bad eyewear in the 80s. I don't know how many of you had.
We had actually, I was working for the government, so all the other foreigners had to use the FEC. The money exchange for foreigners was almost no renminbi, and I was able to use our local renminbi because we had this.
That was we were locals.
So we get into taxis, and they assume I was going to give them the foreign money, right? I was going to give them equivalent of $10, and I give them $1 in renminbi, and they want to kill me. So I had to give them my red card.
By the way, why does it say Robert Woodruff next to your picture and Robert Woodruff next to Lee's picture?
Yeah, they couldn't quite get that right because the Lee part threw everybody off in China. They were like, "Wait, you're Lee?"
I noticed that.
Yeah. And I just thought of a great story somewhere around where that was taken. It was Halloween. So we got together with the foreign journalists and had giant live panda suits. And we got in the CBS van and we were lost. And so we unrolled the window to a group of poor, unsuspecting local Chinese people. And we said in Chinese, "Which way is the zoo?" Through these giant panda hats. And they had no
Gave us directions.
idea. They dutifully just looked at us like, "Oh my God, there's pandas driving the car and they're talking to us and they want to know where to go." So it was a very different place. Now it would just look like somebody was, in giant panda costumes.
Okay, these are great pictures, but we digress a little bit. I want to come back to the foundation. So,
I think these are more interesting.
Yeah.
Really, in some ways.
Memories.
When did you know? I mean, did you, and maybe, I don't even know where the idea, were you thinking about this, but, who had the idea of starting the foundation and giving back to all these folks who have come home with the same injury? I mean, I don't recall when you, I know when you launched it, but when did the idea first come into your heads?
We got a ridiculously disproportionate amount of attention for Bob's injury. And being in the military hospital for the 5 or 6 weeks before he woke up and we could leave, we were not worthy. We saw these incredible young men and women who had given their lives to their country, who didn't want anyone to see them as heroes in any way. And everybody was focused on, Bob.
Mm-hmm.
And so Bob and his 3 brothers and I said to each other, nobody knows, and it was actually Bob's neurosurgeon who said to me, I understand you're a writer. Somebody needs to write a book about this because there are thousands of these young men and women coming through this hospital with this kind of injury, and nobody out there knows about this in America. And I had, as a writer, been just keeping a journal every day because that was how I made sense of this awful thing that had happened. And that stayed with me. I thought, none of us know. There's less than 1% serving, and we're out here in the world, we have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
And if he gets better, if I don't have to be visiting him in a nursing home or propping him up every day, we need to bring some attention to this. And that was, we just sort of dumb-lucked into this. I don't think we had any idea what we were getting into.
But I think the medical care was very much equal.
Yeah,
I think the concern was what happens when you go home.
Right, because of course the other thing is, and this is not just a recent phenomenon, but it's a pretty recent phenomenon, that tons more soldiers are surviving attacks, right?
Bob should not have survived.
Yeah, the survival ratings are gigantic, but the number of wounds are huge.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I remember one of his nurses who took care of him in Baghdad and basically assessed him as critical. Basically said to me she didn't think he would make it. And it just so happened that there wasn't anybody else in the ER at that point in time. So in a triage situation, She said he would have been put to the back of the line and he wouldn't have made it, but there just happened to be nobody in there. And she said, I was in Vietnam as a nurse, and there's no way he would have survived. And moreover, it would have taken 3 months to get him out of country. And now we can put someone on a plane and have them home in 72 hours. It's amazing.
And talk a little bit, if you can, either one of you, about the numbers of people who have, I'm not just talking about wounds, but wounds to the brain or traumatic brain injury. And I don't even know where. I remember it was in the tens of thousands when you first started this, but it's well north of that now. I assume, right?
Well, there's the official number, and then there's the real number.
Right,
I think
which you got at in that documentary, right? Yeah.
What's the latest number? I don't know what the number is now.
It's hundreds of thousands because the way we calculate brain injury now is so different. So multiple concussions that just create maybe just a sense of a different executive function, or...
I think the official number was, I think generally was coming out of the Pentagon, it was about 37,000, something like that.
That was 11 years ago
that was
when this came out.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there's not significant new ones every year now because the war has stepped down since it was. But I think the official, something like 37,000 versus 250,000. I think it was the other one that was more realistic.
And can you speak at all about the impact that you think, obviously, as you said, you got a disproportionate amount of attention, but to your great credit, you did something with it. And the impact this has had either in shining a light or in changing things at all? Would you say that and I don't know how focused you guys are in a regular way on how the attention has improved, or however you want to quantify it, since the foundation and other organizations started paying attention to it?
I'd like to think we may have made a difference. We have given away more than $47 million that have been raised and given to organizations around the country that are doing work with vets and their families, because their families are injured as well, in real important areas: mental health, suicide prevention, reemployment. And the needs have changed. Think about where this war started. It was things like somebody needs a ramp in their home.
Right,
so literally we were writing checks for mattresses for families kicked off the base whose dad was brain injured, and now it's looking at wonderful ways that we can help support somebody and get them past post-traumatic stress with writing therapies and non-traditional methods, meeting Western medicine as well.
I think the message is going out for sure. If you look back in 2007 when that documentary, you showed what was really the first 25 minutes of the piece. The bulk of the story, which was one of the best things about the team that we're working with, Tom Yellen's team, was that we didn't want this story to be about my recovery and Doug Vogt's recovery. We wanted to talk about what's happening with the military. And if you went back to the second half of this, we were so unprepared for this war involving IEDs and survival, medical care that's made them live, but the bombs were creating brain injuries that we did not deal with in previous wars. That has now, we've all woken up about what these things are and how to stop them. But it was really difficult to even see the government to even talk much about it. So we had family members who would tell us that they're obviously those military and their family, the soldiers, the Marines, whoever was hit, they were so badly injured to the brain, but nobody will do anything to help them.
And are you still in touch with a lot of those guys? Do you still visit them? Actually, before you answer that question, I know we have some from a few veterans organizations, some veterans who are here. I don't know if you care to raise your hands, but we'll give you a hand whether you raise your hands or not. Thank you for being here.
And some from the foundation.
Yeah, thank you for your service. I'm sorry.
No, it's hard to be. It's 12 years ago. I'm in contact with a lot that were there. A few that were in the tank with us, and developed a lot of new friends. And many of them are those that were also badly wounded. Yeah. Whether it's one we met in Bethesda Naval when I was there, or those we've done stories about for ABC and many other networks. And I think we've got a collection of friends that have gone through the same thing. What we've learned is that maybe the most efficient way to help veterans is to have veterans help veterans. Because you want to be with your teammate. They want to know exactly how you feel, what you went through. And so in that ways, I relate so well to those who've gone through the same thing.
I need to just tell a moment about Bob's aphasia, because with every hard story comes humor, and you don't get
Did I just say something stupid just now?
No, I'm going to go back to that video, which I have not seen that in maybe a decade. So that was, Katya and I were sort of sitting there, and it was, I don't remember all of the interviews laced together, but when he said Ariki, we literally, in the early days, first of all, he woke up speaking gibberish. And so that was a few days where we would just nod and go, sure, yeah, bajujuju, sure, we know exactly what you're saying. But then it went into a charades phase because he couldn't come up with a word. So I'm thinking, we're never going to go to a cocktail party again. Like, that's going to be a little tough. But my favorite story was he woke up, he got his trach tube out so he could finally eat real food. And he was starving. He couldn't wait to eat, but he couldn't tell me what it was that he wanted to eat because of his aphasia. So he said, I want, and I said, okay, hamburger, no. Sandwich, no. And we're drawing pictures, and I'm thinking, this is really going to stink, for the rest of our life. And he gets this idea in his head, and he goes, okay, I want, and I said, you want a chicken sandwich? And he said, no. And then he said, and I said, you want an egg sandwich? He said, yes! So that was our life for a while. Yeah.
Wow. I couldn't even order coffee. I had to call her from Starbucks to get decaf. I didn't know how to say it.
Oh, he called me one time, and he was saying to the poor barista, the coffee that you don't do, and he finally just turned the phone over to the guy, and I thought, this is really going to be, decaf, but he couldn't think of the word.
You just thought of it. Very good.
And then
I have my own issues.
Well, that's true.
The last two great ones where he would just make up words, but I could sort of figure out what he was saying. So he wanted to clip his nails, and he said, I need some knob shooters. Now think about it. Your finger's a knob, and when you cut it, it shoots the nail off somewhere. And I thought, I'm beginning to think like him now. I know what he's saying.
We should start a company with that product.
Knob shooters.
I don't know.
Knob shooters.
I'm sitting here wondering about all these aphasia jokes, and also, I'm also wondering about how that moment with the egg thing you just did is playing for the webcast viewers.
Hi.
Yeah.
Forgot about that.
Speaking of the webcast viewers, if you have questions, we have folks with mics here, and for those watching beyond the room, a reminder, the hashtag is Asia Society Live, or you can email questions to moderator@asiasociety.org. And while the mic finds the person in orange there, here's a question that has already come in via email, and I think I know the answer, but we watched your documentary about North Korea, so this would have been just a couple of months ago on ABC. Have to assume you will now never be invited back there, or is it your experience that they are not that media savvy and might not have seen it or cared? This was an hour that was pretty, yeah.
I think everybody, I'm sure everybody here from ABC knows that all of this stuff is watched. Every little minute that we do, everything we put on the internet, every piece we broadcast is absolutely watched. And so there are, meeting once in a while with those from the North Korean government, the ones here in New York.
Yeah.
And the last one was with Marcus. With ABC had a meeting not long ago, last week, and it looks like, no, I don't think I'm going back there for a while at least. Mm-hmm. So our relationship with North Korea is not beautiful right now. The last two long hours we did with 2020, I think they had some issues with.
Yeah, well, and so they are, for those of you who haven't seen it, I assume they're available online. And I guess it gets back to the point about why you go, and it's a pretty profound look at from inside and outside of a lot of things that are going on there, and not surprisingly, it's not particularly flattering. Yes, sir. You had a question. If you could just say who you are and keep it relatively brief, that'd be great.
My name is James Harbison. I used to work for Public Radio International. I was wondering, what do you believe the Tatmadaw are trying to steal by authoring the Rohingya genocide? Are they looking to build a deep water harbor? Are they looking to build a pipeline for natural gas? Or do they want to up their production of meth?
Wow.
Wow, I wish I knew the answer to all of that. I mean, I know in that part of Myanmar, in terms of if you're talking about other access to everything from fuel to minerals, that's a huge one that involves, China. China's a major player in all of this too, and China's always split between which side to support, right? Because it's all up there in the ethnic areas of Myanmar. So if China wants access into there, it can't be completely on the side of the government. But it's a complicated one, and that's one I think I said before. We would love to get into Myanmar and go to other parts of it, especially the ones when you do go north towards China. It'd be nice to go and see what's happening there in terms of mining, manufacturing, business, because this is a very powerful country, and it's got a lot of access to it that would be important.
Were you just in the capital on that last one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Kati, we have a question in the front.
Yeah.
Hang on, if you can just wait for a mic. So.
Thank you. Just wonderful, Bob. So moving and inspiring. But this question is to Lee. Lee, you said, I thought rather profoundly a few minutes ago that, of course, the family is injured, which is an obvious point, but yet very little attention is paid to the fact that the whole family is injured when the dad comes back a different person. So can you speak for a few minutes about how your children coped with this and how you helped them? I think it might be helpful for many people to learn from your experience.
That's a whole, I could go on forever, so let me figure out how to keep it short and sweet. We had two different age group kids. So the older kids were 12 and 9, and then the little girls were 5. They were just in kindergarten, the twins. So it was a very different level of communication to those two age groups. I had to be more honest with the older children, but I speak a lot about what I realized in hindsight got me through, and they were what I call the 4 Fs. I realized later they all started with F. So it was family. Bob's brothers and my sisters were with us at the home until summer. So from the moment he came back from the hospital, before actually, because I was down in Washington. So there was somebody who looked and sounded like us with those children at all times. Friends, not so many of you in this room here, could not have made it without meals and rides. We live in this wonderful little town of Rye, and we had dinners through summer and rides to anywhere we needed to go. I have already talked about the third F, which is funny because we had so many low moments where all we had to do was just laugh. Just because you had nothing else to do. And laughter just makes you feel better. And then the 4th F is one that it's just so not fashionable to talk about here in New York, but when I go to the Midwest or anywhere in the Southwest, it resonates, and that F is faith. And yeah, Bob and I don't wear our faith on our sleeve, but boy, in my lowest moments, and at first I was really mad at God, and then when I finally decided that, this wasn't because of something mean I said to somebody in 8th grade, I finally decided to just sort of, I had nothing else. He wasn't waking up, and they were telling me that we needed to go to a nursing home. And literally, that was the first night that I said a prayer. And the next day, I woke into his room, and he was awake. And I'm not going to make anything bigger of that than it was for me, but I think in those moments where you can't sink any lower, faith for so many of us just stops you from going lower. And I use those 4 legs of the stool in different ways and in different degrees, and I use them with my children. So that when they would ask me the hard questions, is Dad going to ever be the same? Will he, come back to us? I would say, I don't know, sweetie, but I believe that God will bring your father back. And that was kind of an easy out in a way. And I could put it somewhere else. And I think my kids could see that, that I was in a framework where I had this foundation. And they've all gone to Sunday school, and what they choose to do with that, whether you're Buddhist, Christian, Jewish, I think we're all talking about the same thing. But in those hospitals with veterans, when I visit them and see them and family members and caregivers, I can tell you that those that do believe in something bigger than themselves, they have better outcomes.
It's interesting. There's some good things that happen out of all of this. I think having been blown up like this and wounded, I don't think I've ever been more satisfied with anything in my life, with the things we've been able to do with the foundation. and to get so many close friends that I've developed because of all of this. Yeah, I'm so lucky that I'm reporting the way, to a large extent, the way I did before. But I also remember there was where Nora, one of our twins, they're going to college this year, one of those little babies in there, said to Lee, said, you know, why is Dad still wounded? Why does he still have scars on his body? And why is his face still have those cuts in it and all of that? Is he getting better? And Lee would say, yes, he's getting better. Don't worry about it. And she says, but you know, I think Dad loves me more than he did before.
Oh my God!
And I think there was kind of a tenderness to it. You know, I think when you get this kind of quick change in your life and the thought that you're not the same as you were before, there's some things, I guess, that get better about. I think there's probably everybody in this room that have some family member that suffered through something, and we all know that there's something better that comes out of them.
Yep.
And so if there's a happy ending to stories like this, I think that's the only one that I can find. But my kids are, knock on wood, they've gotten through it.
Yeah. I think that the people that go through something hard in life, I think we've all been shown resilience. We're all incredible. The human spirit is incredible to me. And I think the people who have been through stuff, I would far rather sit next to them at the dinner party than the person whose life is just perfect.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay, now we need a really serious question about an issue, because otherwise I'm going to lose it up here. So if you can, you can ask whatever you'd like, but if you can just say... You know.
Hi, Bob and Lee. My name is John Draghi. I'm a survivor also, Bob, but not in the way you were. I was a weekend warrior. I was injured in a triathlon 5.5 years ago. I tried to mash my head on the West Side Highway on a bicycle accident. And the question I was going to ask, you guys brilliantly covered about the family in that last giving, that last response that you gave. So I really don't have a whole lot to add. I've got my beautiful wife, Kathy, right next to me here, and 2 teenage boys, one going to college this year. And you know what, Bob? It is all good. I spent the first couple of years being angry, and now it's like, I'm here. This is beautiful. Everything.
All is good? Come on, be honest. I'll tell you, that's not completely accurate.
Most of the time.
Yeah, most of the time. Exactly.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But I guess because you both answered the question about family, especially, thank you, Lee, about the faith, because I was kind of a lapsed Catholic, and now I'm a lot more of a believer because there's definitely some kind of plan here. Whoever the deity is, there's some kind of plan. But you covered the family question very well. So I think the next question I was going to ask, which I'll ask now, is when's the next book? Because In an Instant was great.
Well, Lee's written 2 books since then, so I'm waiting for the next one. But all right. You could probably answer that better than me.
You should write yours, because everybody has a story. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And
yes,
good for you. And nice to meet you. We talked on the phone after this happened. So one of my great pleasures that has come from this is my ability to speak to caregivers and for Bob to talk to people, whether they're military or civilian. So we're always happy to be that connection for people.
I love the aphasia stories with the laughter. My goodness.
I could go on and on, too, my friend.
Very funny thing.
We'll run the aphasia comedy.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Jessica Nash, and I was wondering if you can tell me what your prognosis is for the security situation in Afghanistan, and what you think a light question, I know, and what you think could be done to improve it. And do you think Taliban should be negotiated with, or left out of the negotiations?
Now we're having a flashback to about the last time I was there. I think it was in 2004. I believe was the last time I was there, which is 14 years ago. So I'm not really following Afghanistan that much anymore. Like I said to Tom earlier, I'm not covering the Middle East really much anymore. It's largely all in Asia. I mean, I hope it's the most beautiful country, Afghanistan. I mean, it's stunningly gorgeous. The Taliban was what it was when I was there, and I'm not sure it's significantly changed, but I wish I had an answer to that one, but I'm just not covering that anymore.
Do you maybe just to spin it a little bit though? Do you ever? I don't know whether the veterans you know or speak to, and this is a difficult issue, but look at the hundreds of thousands of Americans who have served, in some cases, multiple tours there. And I don't know to what extent they follow what's going on now, but we're what are we? Almost 17 years since it started, and you went in there. And
I mean,
even if those veterans don't follow it that closely, it must be, at the very least, a source of great frustration, if not anger, that this is where it is now still.
Yeah, I did break the rule one time with Lee not to go back to Iraq or Afghanistan after I was hit in 2006. It was in 2009. We went back there with Admiral Mullen.
To Iraq, right? Or to
well, I wanted to go back to Balad, where they'd saved my life. But we landed in Mosul. We're going to go both to Iraq and Afghanistan. We went to Iraq first. We landed in Mosul, and a big sandstorm was starting to develop. And so we landed in Mosul. We were going to stay there for a few days, and I was going to go up to Balad, but they were so afraid that we would be trapped on the ground for 2 weeks if that sand came in. So we decided to bail on Iraq completely. So all I saw was the airport of Mosul. So I've never been back to Iraq at all. But then we went on to Kabul, and we were there reporting in a couple of the bases around Afghanistan. But largely what I wanted to see what's happening to those that were being wounded in Afghanistan at that time. And there were significant numbers. That was 2009, well before they pulled out. And so I saw a country where it was still major wounds. The days of reporting about Taliban, this is the problem with that. We have no access around the country anymore. I remember it was about 2004 in Iraq, where we had traveled the country around. Certainly 2001 to 2002 in Afghanistan, we were able to wander around Afghanistan. From 2003 to 2004, we were able to wander around Iraq. And then because of all these IED explosions and all of those attacks, that we really, all the reporting has done in these war zones has been largely for embedding with the U.S. military. So even the times when we've going there, after 2002 in Afghanistan, we didn't have much access to see outside the bases. So I think a lot of it's what, I'm not involved in Afghanistan now, but I think that I would love to go back. I'd love to report from there again, but again, I really can't do it.
Let's just say that when he went back the last time with the Joint Chiefs, I was nervous. It kept getting canceled. And so he finally went back, and, I was having a hard time sleeping. And he gets back, and I find out that he's been with Hooters girls on the USO tour on the plane. And so that was a rough trip, wasn't it? Yeah. Thanks for telling me. It's a true story. USO Entertainment.
Was not aware of that. Yeah.
Were you more annoyed he was with the Hooters girls or that he was in Afghanistan?
I was fine with the Hooters girls, actually. Yeah.
She's okay with both, actually. She says she doesn't want me there.
Frank, we have a question here, and then Mr. Crane.
I'm going to ask a question about North Korea, where I'm sure there are no Hooters girls.
Not yet.
Based on your recent experience, every day we hear things about diplomacies in the lead. We hear, preemptive strike. We hear all-out war. Any chance of handicapping it based on your experience or your thoughts?
About doing what?
North Korea, what's going to happen?
I think it's interesting right now with the fact that North Korea has decided to participate in the Olympics, and the question that everybody wants to ask is why are they doing that? And I think there's pretty obvious reasons. I think they want to delay any action happening there. They just want a little bit more time to develop, nuclear power, nuclear bombs. So I think that's part of what's happening. Whether there's some advancements and that there's diplomacy that's going to bring peace, we just don't know. I mean, I have no idea what Kim Jong-un's, what's going through his mind. I had an interview with Dennis Rodman about and the interesting thing is that he knows more about Kim Jong-un than any other diplomat or politician in the world, more than any CIA agent probably in the world, any intelligence people.
And by the way, he's in rehab now.
And he's in rehab, right? Well, DUI of our biggest one. But that says something about the country. I think when I go there, I've been approached sometimes from U.S. military when they ask me what I saw. And I'll just tell them everything that I put on air. But nobody has access to what's happening in the minds of the people there. But I think the big question is about China. What is China going to do about this? And there's the usual one everybody here knows. They want the buffer between China and the U.S. forces. They don't want the refugees, if the thing falls apart, to come over the border into China. But also, they also are very patient in China, and I think they're willing to wait it out. And the last thing that they would want to be is the ones that create a disaster within North Korea. Let the United States to create that, because the goal, largely, as we know, is to control all of Asia and to have the U.S. out of it. So I think there's patience, which we can't really adhere to very well, and there's not that much to convince China into doing much more than they're already doing. So maybe it's just waiting.
There is, and it's hard, as Bob said, to use your word, to handicap any of this. We have had just here recently public and private events where people with great background and great knowledge, they haven't been as often as you have, but they are students of this, who have said, on the one hand, with not certainty, but with confidence, that this Olympic thing is actually there's something going on there, that you cannot send a delegation of that stature, even if they are all athletes. There's hundreds of them going, without senior officials with them who will then conduct some diplomacy of their own. And that the South Koreans, by the way, they are all for, particularly the new regime, they're tamping this down. And as somebody said, my goodness, peace may break out, and what's the United States going to do then?
You ask about Afghanistan. You look at countries where we've moved into militarily. I mean, it's not in an area where it's going to destroy our economy when the war begins. There's never been any place like North Korea. It's it's like in the middle of New York. I mean, it is in the middle of, first of all, not only the economy, all of Asia is right there, but also we have huge numbers of American forces there. Yep. Not only just the soldiers and the Marines, but their wives and their husbands and their children.
Yep.
And so the idea of a war there is, I don't think I've ever seen a place in the world where it's been less likely, if you really care about much bigger issues other than winning a war, as we know.
Anyway, worth another hour. Bill Crane, if we can get it. Mike, here we probably have time for this and one more.
In Myanmar, what do you think that Aung San Suu Kyi should do to improve that situation or handle that situation?
She seems to be kind of trapped in the middle between something. I mean, I know what she did, and to bring a form of diplomacy to Myanmar is one side of her. I think it's hard to tell why is she not doing more about this? Is it because she doesn't believe that something happening to the Rohingya people, which I can't imagine that's the case? But we also know the one really in control in Myanmar, and certainly on this issue in that area, is the military. And she doesn't control the military. Her power has nothing to do with making decisions for the military. And this is a military issue up where that is. So if she fights against the military or does something for the Rohingya people up there, then maybe she will be sent out and this whole advancements and diplomacy may end. So is she evil, or is she smart? Is she patient? Is she, brilliant? Stupid? I don't think we know any of this, because I don't see what's happening on the inside of that too. But there's certain different arguments for what she should do and what she shouldn't do. And I think my own personal opinion is she's pretty torn. And I think what we can't get access to, again, is the places where this is happening. And we can't talk to the military. We can't get in interviews with the military. And we can't get an interview with her either. I mean, she's pretty much disappeared from attention.
Yeah. She was here, as you know, Bill, I mean, just about a year and a half ago. Big public thing here in New York. And I think you're right. And also, I mean, to some extent, the press and organizations like ours invested in that woman, a kind of halo of which was, as you say, kind of deserved. But she's clearly made the choice, for the moment anyway, of not, of playing a kind of realpolitik that leaves these people in awful shape. We have time for one more question. Yes, sir. The gentleman in the back there.
Thank you. This question is for Mr. Woodruff. What would you advise someone who wishes to cover stories in the Middle East?
I'm sorry, what?
What would you advise someone who wishes to cover stories in the Middle East?
Do you mean in terms of the violence, or in terms of, or just?
Want to?
In terms of geopolitics.
In the Middle East?
Yes.
That's a big one.
If your wife lets you, go for it.
Get a good helmet would be my advice.
Yeah, make sure you duck.
No. What is your advice?
It's kind of interesting that literally when I got out of college, I had this dream of going and go and report. It's interesting, well before I even really realistically thought that I would. But I remember I had this dream of going somewhere between 1980 and 1988 to go and cover the Iran-Iraq battle going on, the war there. And I remember I was on the subway and I talked to some guy who just came back from it. Wow. And he told me, "You want to go there? You're probably going to get killed. It's incredibly dangerous, but you'd love it." Kind of had that feeling from a guy who was a reporter that had been there before. But I didn't go because I wasn't really that prepared to do it. The Middle East is a gigantic story, and it's a beautiful place and a dangerous place, depends where you are. If you're willing to do that, go for it. I think we use a lot of freelancers now in the Middle East because we've withdrawn a lot of our bases and our bureaus in the Middle East, and so there are opportunities for, if you want to go and freelance and get some work, then I think you got a better chance of doing that now than you were 10 years ago.
Not dangerous everywhere either.
Right. Well, when you say the Middle East, I keep thinking it's someplace where there were wars. There's a million places in the Middle East that are beautiful, and I've been back. I've been back to Lebanon, and back to Syria before the horrific stuff happened. Yeah. But it's I think if you want to do it, go for it.
And maybe back to where we began, learn a language. That's what got him started, right? Before we close, just one more acknowledgement. He'll be embarrassed, but I mentioned my colleague John Wong, who had the nice suggestion about the Myanmar video, also happens to have served in Iraq and Afghanistan. John, thank you. He left the room when I acknowledged him. Bob, Lee, it's great to have you here. I really hope you will come back as long as it's in Asia, come back for when you want to share your impressions and all the rest. Good luck as empty nesters, and warm thank you, please, for Bob and Lee.
Thank you.